Welcome to the debate. Imagine holding a vial in your hands that grants you, absolute invulnerability. It makes you a god. But there is a catch.
Right, there's always a catch.
Exactly. The second that liquid enters your veins, it completely strips away the last remaining shred of your human empathy.
So, would you take it? That is the real question.
It is. And in the May 2026 broadcast of The Boys Season 5, Episode 6, which is titled Though the Heavens Fall, the narrative forces its characters to answer that exact question. We are looking at the penultimate installment of a series that has been building for years, bringing the franchise's thematic tensions to an absolute boiling point.
It is the absolute definition of narrative pressure cooking. I mean, if you are watching this broadcast, you are watching the collapse of every safety net that characters and the audience thought they had.
So the question we are exploring today is this. Does this broadcast ultimately succeed as a profound psychological tragedy about the burden of human frailty? Or is its true brilliance found in its blistering socio-political satire regarding the inevitability of authoritarianism and corporate greed?
And I will contend that framing this as just a personal, emotional tragedy, well, it lets the perpetrators off the hook entirely. Those emotional arcs are merely vehicles for a devastating structural critique. The broadcast is fundamentally about theological fascism and how late-stage capitalism commodifies its own destruction.
And I will be arguing that the narrative's core strength is its philosophical exploration of mortality, trauma, and the psychological limits of humanity. Underneath the superpowers, it is about the terror of being fragile.
Let's get into it then.
Let's lay out the groundwork. From my perspective, this broadcast operates as a masterclass in what we might call ontological tragedy, which, I know, is just a fancy way of saying it's a tragedy about the terrifying reality of being a physical, decaying human being.
A bit academic, but yes.
Right. The entire mechanism driving this back half of the season is that flawless 1940s Nazi-era V-One Serum.
The ultimate MacGuffin.
Exactly. And what the writers do here is establish a very clear biological inverse correlation. If we let physical invulnerability represent one side of the scale and human empathy represent the other, the narrative posits that as the purity of the V-One Serum approaches absolute perfection, human empathy flatlines.
It accelerates moral decay.
Yes. We see this culminate in Homelander's desperate, horrific injection of the V-One just to escape his own aging. And of course, Soldier Boy's completely irrational decision to enable him. To me, this proves the story is about the monstrous lengths we will go to escape our own mortality.
Well, let me pause you there, because I look at that exact same scene and see something entirely different.
Oh.
Yeah. I mean, while the fear of mortality is present, treating Homelander as a tragic psychological figure misses the macro-level horror of what is actually happening. This broadcast is primarily an architectural satire of power structures.
I don't disagree that the satire is there.
But the personal traumas of these characters are completely overshadowed by the societal implications they unleash. The moment the show introduces a character like Oh Father and his megachurch, the text stops being about one man's fear of getting wrinkles.
Wrinkles is putting it mildly.
You know what I mean? It becomes a razor-sharp critique of how absolute power inevitably co-ops our foundational institutions. The serum is just the catalyst. The true horror isn't that Homelander is scared of aging. It is how eagerly society reorganizes itself to worship the monster he becomes.
Okay, if the serum is the catalyst, we need to examine the inciting incident that actually shifts the balance of power. We have to look at the transition from the theoretical threat of V-One to the shocking reality of Soldier Boy actually handing the serum over to Homelander.
Which was a massive swerve.
It was. To understand this, we have to look at Sister Sage's catastrophic miscalculation. If you're listening and wondering why the smartest person in the world didn't see this coming, it's because of the limits of pure logic.
Right.
Sage extracted the serum's location from Soldier Boy's mind and allied with our protagonists under a seemingly airtight assumption that Soldier Boy despises Homelander's weakness and would therefore never empower him. But Sage failed because she could not account for the irrational, toxic love Soldier Boy harbored for Clara Vought.
The woman who eventually became Stormfront. Sage's shock in that moment is the collapse of an entire worldview. She realizes her math is basically useless.
Exactly. Think about it like trying to win a game of chess against a supercomputer. The computer calculates the mathematically perfect move every single time. It expects you to act in your own rational self-interest.
Sure.
But Sage didn't realize Soldier Boy wasn't playing chess. He was playing emotional Russian roulette. You cannot outmath someone who is willing to blow up the board out of spite and unresolved grief.
Right.
Sage's predictive models are just like modern geopolitical algorithms that constantly fail in the real world. I mean, State departments assume actors will behave rationally, but they underestimate the deep-seated, irrational, historical grievances of human beings.
Humans are messy.
Exactly. A computer cannot quantify a generation-spanning blood feud or a twisted romantic entanglement. Logic dictates what people should do, trauma dictates what they actually will do.
That is a highly compelling analogy, but does that actually hold up when you look at the ideology at play? I just don't buy that Soldier Boy's choice was purely about tragic human emotion.
You don't think his grief was genuine?
Oh, it was genuine. But Clara Vought wasn't just a lover. She was the literal architect of modern fascism within this universe. By having Soldier Boy hand the V-One to Homelander because, quote, it's what Clara would have wanted, the narrative is explicitly showing the deliberate passing of the torch of white supremacist ideology.
So you view it more as an inheritance?
It is an inheritance. Sage's failure isn't just a critique of artificial logic versus human emotion. It is a terrifying thesis statement that systemic bigotry is vastly stronger than any rational political strategy. The legacy of fascism is sticky. It is resilient. Homelander is the biological and ideological heir, and Soldier Boy is securing that horrific lineage. It is not just a sad man missing his girlfriend.
Look, I see why you emphasize the ideological inheritance, but let's look at the visceral action on screen. Homelander lasers his own arm to inject the V-One.
Yeah, it's brutal.
He is literally burning away his own flesh to reject his biological humanity. The ideology might be the backdrop, but the immediate driver is a profound, pathetic fear of aging. It grounds the fascist takeover in the most intimate, humiliating human insecurity.
I hear you. But what happens immediately after that injection forces us to zoom out. We move from inherited power to the elevation of that power into literal godhood. We have to talk about Daveed Diggs's character, Oh Father.
Ah, the Easter service.
The Easter service at the megachurch. We are no longer looking at psychology. We are looking at the architecture of theological fascism. And I want to unpack what we mean by a megachurch simulacrum, because the broadcast builds a terrifying imitation of faith here.
It really does.
You have the meticulous aesthetics of African-American gospel culture, the charismatic preaching, the massive choir, and it is all being aggressively synthesized with Homelander's neo-fascist agenda and the lingering influence of Firecracker.
It is an incredibly jarring juxtaposition to watch. The cultural aesthetics of an oppressed group being weaponized to worship the ultimate oppressor.
It's meant to induce whiplash. It serves as a profound commentary on how proximity to absolute power erases historical and racial divides. Oh Father isn't brainwashed. He justifies this shift in worship by pointing out that the abstract concept of a traditional God is obsolete when faced with a walking, indestructible deity who can incinerate you with his eyes.
Right. Pragmatism over faith.
Exactly. The institution doesn't fight the authoritarian. It adapts to serve him, so it can retain a shred of relevance. And let's not forget the physical reality of the scene. Oh Father isn't just a spiritual figurehead. He is a literal militarized threat with a sonic scream that incapacitates Annie. It is the literal physical weaponization of faith.
I completely acknowledge the brilliance of that structural critique. The megachurch scene is a masterclass in sociopolitical satire. But I push back on the idea that the structural critique is the ultimate takeaway.
Why is that?
Because look at how that confrontation in the church is actually resolved. Huey and Annie don't defeat Oh Father with a structural countermovement. They don't dismantle the institution. They survive through a desperate, purely psychological bluff.
The virus bomb threat?
Yes. Huey manipulates O'Father by claiming Annie has ingested the antivirus vaccine, and he threatens to detonate an aerosolized virus bomb right there in the congregation. It is mutually assured destruction. It's Cold War doctrine applied to a superhero conflict.
But it's just a tactical maneuver?
A psychological maneuver. They survive by weaponizing fear. If O'Father and Homelander were purely structural ideological actors, they might call the bluff for the sake of the cause. But they have self-preservation instincts. It is human ingenuity, desperation, and the psychological understanding of your enemy's fear of death that actually drive the resolution of the scene. The protagonists realize they are fighting a militarized religious crusade, and the only way to hold a newly minted god at bay is through psychological terror.
Look, I understand that the tactical maneuver was psychological. But while Huey and Annie are fighting this apocalyptic holy war, what is the rest of the world doing?
Buying tickets, probably.
Precisely. This is where the broadcast truly shines for me. It masterfully contrasts these immense world-ending religious stakes with the banal, cynical reality of the corporate world. While millions are literally worshiping Homelander as a god, Vaught's executives don't see a deity. They just see a marketing opportunity. Which brings us to the VMC theater scenes.
Oh, seeing the legend again was, well, it was something.
We find the legend, this repository of Vaught's darkest historical sins, reduced to working a minimum wage concession stand under the alias Chet Vanderbilt. And surrounding him is the most brutal parody of late-stage capitalist hyper-reality.
You're referring to the environment where nothing matters except the intellectual property?
Yes. If you want to know what late-stage capitalist hyper-reality means, look at the pre-show advertisement. It's a shot-for-shot mockery of the AMC Theater's Nicole Kidman ad.
Right, with Firecracker.
You have the recently deceased Firecracker giving this overly earnest, entirely artificial speech about the magic of the movies to an audience that is completely desensitized to actual magic and actual horror occurring right outside the theater doors. And then there's the deep popcorn bucket.
Which is, of course, mimicking the viral real-world promotional items like the Dune Part 2 popcorn bucket that took over the internet.
Yes, but here it features a gaping aquatic mouth. It operates on multiple levels. It is a crude visual gag, certainly, but more importantly, it is a vicious critique of how corporate entertainment brazenly commodifies a character's history of sexual assault into a viral profit-generating novelty item.
It's extremely bleak. The boardroom absorbs the trauma and turns it into plastic merchandise. And the dialogue in the background, characters are openly mocking the box office failure of Vaught's Invisible Force 2, a franchise centered on Translucent, a hero who has been dead since the first season.
They literally state that the budget was twice as big but made half the box office of the real-world film Kraven the Hunter.
It's incredible. The show is meticulously tearing down the very superhero industrial complex it exists within.
That cynicism also extends to the environmental subplots, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The Deep is forced into performative environmentalism, shooting a public service announcement to defend Vought Petroleum's controversial ocean pipeline. But the resulting ecological disaster, a massive oil spill, doesn't happen because of some grand, ideologically driven supervillain plot.
Right, it's just infighting. Exactly. Why does it happen? Because Black Noir II is carrying a petty personal grievance against the Deep for murdering the Vought film director Adam Burke. Noir sabotages the pipeline out of spite, and the Deep murders him in return.
So it's just human pettiness.
The broadcast is showing us that global environmental catastrophes aren't always the result of master plans. They are often the collateral damage of petty narcissistic corporate squabbles by employees operating with zero oversight. The structure is inherently cynical.
I see the appeal of that argument, and the corporate cynicism is undeniably a major texture of the episode. However, I am not convinced it is the core of the narrative.
Really?
Because the writers provide a deliberate, emotional antidote to this late-stage capitalist nightmare. The structural decay you're describing only heightens the intimate, human choices made by the protagonists. To see this, we have to connect that corporate hyper-reality directly to the Bombsight subplot.
The 1950s hero who was hoarding the original V-One.
Yes. Mason Dye's character, Bombsight, wanted to give the serum to his aging human lover, the Golden Geisha, so they could be immortal together. But she firmly rejects it. She recognizes that immortality without the natural cycle of life, without vulnerability, is an unbearable curse.
Right.
This historical tragedy isn't just lore. It directly mirrors the deeply emotional realization that Kimiko and Annie have amidst all this chaos. The broadcast frames this as the vampire's kiss realization.
We see Kimiko explaining this to Frenchie through sign language in a very quiet, grounded scene.
It is the emotional anchor of the hour. Kimiko and Annie consciously, deliberately reject the V-One Serum. They realize that to take it, to become immortal, would be to condemn themselves to standing by helplessly as Frenchie and Huey age, decay, and die over the coming decades. They choose the curse of human mortality.
That makes sense.
And look at how Soldier Boy resolves the Bombsight situation in the flashback. He doesn't kill him. He uses his radiation ability to burn the Compound V out of Bombsight's bloodstream, permanently stripping him of his powers and his immortality.
Essentially making him human again?
Exactly. The narrative explicitly frames this not as a punishment, but as the ultimate gift of mortality. It grants Bombsight the ability to live out a finite, meaningful existence alongside Geisha. True strength in this universe isn't found in a flawless serum or absolute power. It is found in the courage to accept frailty, loss, and death.
That is a striking juxtaposition. Homelander bleeds himself to escape his humanity, while Kimiko and Annie actively embrace humanity's inevitable end.
Which is why I maintain that the true power of this broadcast lies in its intimate psychological stakes, the conscious rejection of godhood by those who understand that to love another person requires the vulnerability of mortality. Homelander is a monster not just because of his fascist ideology or his corporate backing, but because he is utterly incapable of accepting the human condition. The structural satire only exists to highlight the tragedy of his psychological brokenness.
Well, and I will maintain that while those character moments are beautifully executed and poignant, the episode's enduring legacy will be its unflinching architectural critique. It shows us exactly how easily humanity's institutions, our cinemas, our megachurches, our environmental efforts, crumble and adapt to serve authoritarianism.
You really think the system is the star here?
I do. The tragedy isn't just that Homelander fears aging. It's that the world is structurally designed to pave the way for a fascist god the very moment he decides to ascend. The system was waiting for him.
I think we can both agree, however, on the sheer narrative elegance of how this broadcast handles its franchise-expanding lore. I mean, the writers had a massive, frankly burdensome corporate mandate to lay the groundwork for the upcoming 1950s prequel series Vought Rising.
Ah, yes, the dreaded backdoor pilot integration. Usually, that is a death knell for narrative pacing.
Right. Contemporary television critics often deride these integrations as craven commercialism, just sacrificing the main story to expand corporate intellectual property. But here, the introduction of the 1940s V-One, the history of Frederick Vought, and the physical presence of a 1950s hero like Bombsight aren't just promotional Easter eggs.
No, they actually matter.
They're deployed as crucial puzzle pieces that deepen the immediate emotional and structural stakes of the present-day narrative. Bombsight's tragic love story is the exact mechanism that allows Kimiko to vocalize her own philosophical stance on mortality. It serves the characters first and the franchise second.
It uses the world building of the past to legitimize the emotional stakes of the present. I completely see your point there. It's an incredibly sophisticated way to handle a corporate mandate. And, it forces the viewer to look at the material through both micro and macro lenses simultaneously. You have to hold the grief of a single character in one hand and the collapse of a society in the other.
Which brings us back to where we started. The illusion of simple, clean narratives is shattered here. We are left looking at a deeply complex landscape that refuses to offer easy answers.
A landscape where the most powerful weapons aren't just superpowers. The real weapons are the manipulation of faith, the commodification of our collective trauma, and the inescapable gravitational weight of our own history.
And as we close today, without declaring one perspective definitively correct, I want to leave everyone reflecting on that final, chilling image the broadcast leaves us with. After the theological fascism has taken root and the hyper-intelligent predictive algorithms have completely failed, we are left looking at fragile, mortal human beings. They are stripped of their safety nets, devoid of any structural support, choosing to stand completely vulnerable against an indestructible, manufactured God.
Let justice be done.
Though the heavens fall. Thank you for joining us on The Debate.